Barbados, we must never allow present circumstances to define our future. In the past, we were known for our strong and decisive leadership, our social, economic and political stability, and our well-educated and productive workforce. Who we become will depend on the vision and the focus we have. These series of videos will challenge us as a people to dig deep within and find our purpose. We are Refocusing Barbados.
Greetings, my name is Marsha Hinesley. It is my pleasure to do this video for Refocusing Barbados today. I was asked to do this video on my reflections of the National Union of Public Workers' meeting, where they briefed the National Conservation Commission's staff on their decision to agree for their matters to go before the Employment Rights Tribunal. Many of you know that I was a teacher in Barbados. During my time of teaching, I also was involved in the Barbados Union of Teachers. I was an active member of the union. I went as far as contesting some of the union elections. The union is something that is very near and dear to my heart as an individual. I understand the union in its historical context. I understand the struggle that the union came out of. I understand that the union was a very important tool in the 1930s period for Caribbean people to organize themselves, for Caribbean people to find the space to start to discuss the issues that were important to them. I also understand the connection of the union to the political process in the Caribbean, because it was out of the union and the union engagement that many of the parties that led the Caribbean into its independence period emerged. On a more personal level, because of my involvement with the Barbados Union of Teachers, I grew accustomed to certain things, to certain principles which a union would stand for and which a union would not allow itself to be drawn away from. I always thought that the union, no matter what, had a responsibility to represent and protect its primary constituent, which is the people who pay their dues, the people who are the union. I'm accustomed to unions that support families through crisis. I'm accustomed to unions who put strategies in place to help members with insurance. Most unions have some form of financial organization. This is the work of the union. The work of the union is to touch the hearts of the people and to be always connected to the hearts and the needs of the people. I've also learned that one of the important things that union members do is that we support each other, because at the end of the day, the strength of the union is in the numbers of the union. So back in the Barbados Union, when I was in the Barbados Union of Teachers, we stood in solidarity with the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union when we were fighting the Louis Lynch saga. This is what unions do. They support each other. I decided that I wanted to go to the National Union of Public Workers to stand in solidarity with the NCC workers when the tribunal process was being explained to them. I have a number of very close friends who work at the National Conservation Commission, some who have been kept and some who have been sent home. I went to the meeting in the morning and I sat among a group of friends. We were having discussions before the start of the meeting. We had discussions during Dennis Clark's presentation. I think that the consensus among the group that I was sitting in at the end of the presentation was that we were confused about a number of points which we heard in the presentation. One of the things that stuck out most was that Mr. Clark indicated he wasn't in full agreement with the Employment Rights Tribunal being the course of action that the workers should take. Mr. Clark indicated that that was in fact a strategy put on the table by the Barbados Workers Union. And because he did not want it to be perceived that there was a split in the union movement in Barbados, the National Union of Public Workers decided to support the Barbados Workers Union's proposal. That took my mind back to a couple of months ago in this country, when we had a very public and very contentious split in the union movement over who would represent Barbados at the International Labour Organization's conference overseas. That split was played out very publicly in the media. It resulted in the Barbados Workers Union removing itself from the coalition of trade unions. So I couldn't understand, in a case where you would be justified because you are staying true to your public, your purpose, the people, in a situation like that, why it would suddenly become so important for you not to be perceived as moving away from the Barbados Workers Union. The National Union of Public Workers went to the meeting on Sunday with one mandate. The mandate given to it by the workers at the National Conservation Commission to protect their jobs, to protect them from the unfairness and indignity of having somebody continue to work after 10 months of service, while somebody with 10 years of service is put on the breadline. I turned to one of the people who was sitting next to me. I asked him who had the bigger majority of the NCC workers between the unions, the National Union of Public Workers and the Barbados Workers Union. And again, this goes back to my experience with the Barbados Union of Teachers and the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union in the Louis Lynch saga. The Barbados Union of Teachers was very much the one who was responsible for constructing the negotiation and what was negotiated for. The Barbados Secondary Teachers Union stood in solidarity with the demands of the Barbados Union of Teachers. So it figured for me that if the National Union of Public Workers, as I suspected and as was confirmed by the workers, had the bigger majority of workers, that they should be the ones who decided what they were going to negotiate for in the meeting. So again, I was unclear as to how Mr. Clark could have felt like he needed to go with the Barbados Workers Union and what they thought was the best process if he, as the representative of the union that had the larger body of workers, was not comfortable with that course of action. Another thing that confused me is when Mr. Clark was going through the options that the tribunal had in terms of how it could rule. Because instead of saying to the workers, this is a matter of principle, which I'm accustomed to the union movement doing. The union movement fights matters of principle. That matter of principle affects a person's or people's lives, but it is a matter of principle that the union fights. So instead of hearing Mr. Clark say, you know what, this is the matter of principle, that we want a clear commitment that in the case where our country has to do retrenchment, not because anybody did not perform as we are being told, not because the workers don't get to work early or any other thing. We were told that this retrenchment is based in the fact that we have to cut the deficit which this country is now facing. What the union is fighting, the matter of principle, is when there is an economic climate that demands that workers must go home, the principle of last in and first out should be adhered to. So you don't have a situation where one person working for 5 months is retained and another working for 5 years is set on the breadline. The matter of principle dropped off the table in the discussion about what the tribunal could return as its verdict. The workers were being prepared for the fact that all of them might not get their jobs back. And if all of them do not get their jobs back, what the union is doing is setting a precedent that anytime there is economic retrenchment in this country, last in, first out is not a principle to be adhered to. And that concerned me. The third thing that caught my attention was that Mr. Clark sought to explain to the workers that he had called off the protest march which they had planned for that Monday morning. Now, I thought that the way that the union worked is that if the workers had given the union the mandate to have a protest action and the union had continued to negotiate, that the union would have made it clear at the negotiation that it cannot take protest action off the table until it returned to where the mandate came from, the workers, to decide if the protest action was still going to happen or not happen. The point that I'm making is the union and the negotiation that the union does is sanctioned and mandated by the people. That is who the union is. The union is its members. So I was not sure how a unilateral decision was taken to take protest action off of the table, and the union workers, the workers were being told that that is what had happened, as opposed to them now being the ones to decide if they wanted to take the protest action off the table, or if they felt that that is still something they needed to carry through with to be able to demonstrate their seriousness about the matter, their unhappiness with how they were treated, and to basically be given the space to voice and air some of their concerns. After Clark's presentation concluded, one of the friends that I was sitting with in a meeting asked me to take the mic to get some clarification on some of the issues that we'd started to discuss in the little group. I said to him, if I go to that mic, I will be put out of this meeting. He said to me, no, I am asking you as one of the affected workers to speak on my behalf. I said to him, I don't think that's going to work. He asked me again. I said, okay, I will try to get some clarifications. By that time, Mr. Maloney had joined the meeting. I stood at the mic, and Mr. Clark continued to conclude his response to a question that was asked previous to me taking the mic. Mr. Maloney took his place at the head table, and as I started my presentation at the mic, he whispered into Mr. Clark's ears. I started my presentation that day, as I started my presentation today, as I start most of my presentations, with a contextualization of what I thought was the principle of the matter that the union was fighting. I indicated to Mr. Clark that all of what was happening with the NCC workers was happening in a country where only last year the political directorate that now forms the government said to the people of Barbados, not one job would be lost if that government was returned for a second term. I said to Mr. Clark, the workers were told by the electorate, I said to Mr. Clark, the workers were told by the directorate that due to the economic changes, they had to fall away from that commitment. I said to Mr. Clark, The union workers were willing to accept that. Economic times change, they were willing to hear that. I said to Mr. Clark, the union said to the workers that they got a further commitment from the government that the last in would be the first out if any cuts were supposed to be done. I said to Mr. Clark, and now today it seems to me like the union is asking the workers to forget the initial promise made, to forget the promise about the last in being the first out, and to simply make way for the political directorate to do what it had to do, irregardless of the consequences for the workers. Mr. Clark responded to me and he said to me, I usually misunderstand a lot of things. And with that, he asked me if I was a worker at the National Conservation Commission. I said no, I was not, and he asked me to leave the meeting, which I did, because at the end of the day, it is not to create any scenes. It was simply, like I said, to stand in solidarity with my brothers and sisters at the National Conservation Commission. All of this saddens me. Barbados is my country. I never thought that there was any place I could go in Barbados and be asked to leave, much less a union meeting. Mr. Clark is Bajan, the political directorate is Bajan, I am a Bajan. I felt like I had all rights, like any other Bajan who wanted to stand in solidarity that morning with the National Conservation Commission members to attend the meeting. I understand, because I understand the historical importance of the union, the seriousness of what we are seeing playing out in our country at this time. The union in Barbados acts as a gatekeeper in our democracy. A gatekeeper is a set of people, an institution, which ensures that the government delivers the best governance to the people within a country. So in the American system, you would hear about the fourth estate, which is the media. And the media is enshrined in the Constitution of America as a protector of the system, to ensure that there is not corruption, to ensure that the government functions in the way that it should function. We don't have a fourth estate enshrined in our constitution in Barbados. But we've had a number of historical organizations which acted in the role of gatekeeper. The church being one, the unions being another, the media, more and more increasingly over time, also becoming another. When you have a society where the gatekeepers do not adhere to their responsibility to keep the government in check, you have the perfect conditions for corruption to take place and for the people that the government serves to be forgotten. It concerns me what I see happening in my country. Unions have been historically, politically connected. We cannot disagree with that. Anybody who knows the history, like I said, around the 1930s and coming into the independence period in the region understands that there have been several examples where unions were affiliated with political parties. Unions who choose to become government empowered unions open opportunities for corruption. You may have members of the executive who are then given goodies to come over to the side of the government. So you see executive members becoming diplomats. You see situations play out where members of the union are put on boards and that kind of thing. This is dangerous. This is dangerous. Because when that occurs, you have a consolidation of the government, but you don't have protection for the people. And that is what we're seeing playing out in Barbados. That concerns me. I know that there are a lot of Bajans who are in fear of losing their jobs. I hear it every day, all over the place. I also know that there is a dip, a serious dip in productivity in this country because of that fear. If you're going to do a job well, you have to be left the space to be creative. You have to be offered some security of tenure in order to do your job. So those of you who are not saying anything because you're fearful for your jobs are not protecting your country. Because you go to work and you sit down and you are so obsessed with staying within the invisible lines that have been created so that you maintain your job, you are not giving Barbados the opportunity that it needs to get out of this economic recession. We have to do something for our country. A feature of democracy is not fear. So if you feel fearful, you have to ask yourself, what has gone wrong in your democracy? I am going to be at the next meeting whenever the next set of retrenched workers are sent home. I cannot be fearful because I do not want to see my country go down a certain path. Democracy means that I have a responsibility to remain engaged in the governance of this country. It means that I should have the right as a Barbadian to feel like I can go to a place where other Barbadians are gathered, hold their hands, and talk them through issues that are affecting them. I do not want to feel like a prisoner in my country. I do not want to fear not being able to pay my mortgage. I don't want to fear not being able to have a job. I don't want to fear for participation in the union. But if I do feel those things, I am not going to give up and go away. I am going to continue to question the system until it works in the way that history says it is supposed to work. I am going to continue to question the system until it works in a way I see it working in other democracies across the Caribbean and across the world. We have decisions to make. If your union is not working for you and with you, you need to find another organization that is willing to establish that gatekeeper rule, because it is very important in a democracy. You can always feel free to come and join Refocusing Barbados, and you won't have to pay any dues.